Good day, everyone. My name is Andrew Ridgey. I am the Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. We are a not-for-profit association that represents the restaurant and nightlife industry in the city of New York. We want to thank you all for joining us. I think it goes without saying, New York City's restaurants, our bars, our nightlife is vital to not only the economic footprint of the city, but also the social fabric. And right now, our local restaurants, your favorite place to go out and eat and drink, are really in a crisis. And the thread that makes up that social fabric is being torn at the seams. We need our industry to recover if the city of New York is going to recover. We don't yet know how many of our beloved businesses have yet permanently shuttered. We do know the numbers somewhere in the thousands, and that number will continue to grow as this crisis goes on. We also know that there's nearly 200,000 New Yorkers that are still out of work that were formerly employed in eating and drinking places. That's about 60% of the total jobs. This has not only been a health crisis, but it's also been and continues to be an economic crisis. And we need to support these businesses. We need all levels of government to come together with policies to help these businesses through these trying times. But today we are here to talk about a very important issue, indoor dining in New York City restaurants. Restaurants anticipated that back on July 6th, we would be permitted to start opening up indoors at a 50% reduced occupancy based on meeting a list of health metrics. That plan was postponed, and now we are more than 6 weeks out from July 6th when we anticipated to reopen. Restaurants throughout the rest of the state have met the same benchmarks New York City restaurants have, and they have been opening and operating indoors at a reduced occupancy for months now. And there is no reason that we have been presented why New York City restaurants are any different. Why can you eat indoors in Yonkers in Westchester County, but you cannot eat indoors 100 yards down the street in the Bronx? Why are restaurants open up indoors in Nassau County and Long Island, but not in Queens? These are the questions that we need answers to. The fact is that these businesses, as much as outdoor dining has been helping, outdoor dining was never meant as a solution to save our restaurants. It was intended to help offset reduced indoor occupancy. And although there's about 10,000 restaurants that have been participating in outdoor dining, there's more than 25,000 eating and drinking establishments throughout the 5 boroughs. And they employ around 300,000 people, or at least they did before this pandemic started. And what we've seen is the state implemented a multi-phase program to allow different sectors of the economy to open up. As I mentioned, New York City restaurants, we've passed that phase, and we have met, sustained, and exceeded the benchmarks that have allowed the rest of the state to open. And now we are sitting here 6 weeks later with no plan. So today, we brought together restaurateurs from throughout the 5 boroughs to demand a plan from Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio about when and how indoor dining is going to reopen in the city of New York. These businesses need to plan. They need to decide whether or not they are going to turn in their keys, if they are going to continue to exhaust their personal savings in the hopes of maybe one day being able to reopen. New York City public schools are opening. Gyms announced that they're opening, and all these different sectors of the economy are opening. We need a plan for New York City restaurants, and not having one is unacceptable. So I want to introduce you to several different speakers throughout the day, or I say throughout this press conference. We'll come back and make a few additional comments, and then we will open it up for questions. But today we are here to demand a plan from Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio to, one, justify why the city of New York has met, sustained, and exceeded the benchmarks that have allowed restaurants throughout the rest of the state to reopen, as our health metrics continue to get better and better and go down, thankfully. But there is no plan for the city of New York. And two, we need that plan now, because restaurants cannot just be told a day before that they are supposed to open. They need to buy products, they need to hire people back. And if they're not going to open anytime very soon, they need to know that, because they need to make very hard decisions about their futures. And our elected leaders and government leaders must provide that type of guidance and support. And particularly if they're not opening up, they need to articulate a detailed plan of what they are going to do to support us until we are permitted to start reopening. And let's be clear, even at 100%, at 50% reduced occupancy, that's not an answer too, but it is better than nothing. So I first like to turn this over to our counsel, Robert Bookman, to say a few words, and then I'll introduce our restaurateurs throughout the 5 boroughs, and then we'll open it up for questions. And Robert, you can unmute yourself, or I got you there.
I got it. I'm good. Thank you very much, Andrew. Look, as the lawyer for the Hospitality Alliance and for the industry, I obviously look at this from a legal perspective. You'll be hearing from restaurant owners in a moment concerning their personal stories. From a legal perspective, we have to say that 2 months into every county in the state of New York allowing indoor dining at 50% capacity and other safety measures, with little to no incidents, with the daily infection rate going down over those 2 months, with thousands and thousands now of tens of thousands of New Yorkers that have been enjoying indoor dining over the last 2 months in every county of the state of New York, except New York City. We think it's clear that the science is clear in the state of New York. The experiment has been successful, and there is no health or scientific basis to continue to discriminate against New York City by prohibiting dining here in the city. As Andrew said, there is no scientific difference between a restaurant in Northern Bronx and Southern Westchester. There's no difference between a small restaurant in Harlem and a small restaurant in Rockland County, where I live, which has had one of the highest rates of infection of the COVID virus outside of New York City. And yet, for 2 months, the restaurants in Rockland County, with the support of our county executive and our local officials, have been happily having people safely dine indoors, supplemented by outdoor dining in the good weather. So if this is not scientific based, what is it based on? And that's, as a matter of law, what we're asking today. We need an answer. It's beginning to seem a lot more like stubbornness than science. An overwhelming majority of small business restaurant owners and minority small business restaurant owners are located in New York City compared to the rest of the state. By continuing this unlawful discrimination against the city of New York, it is having a disparate impact on small business owners and minority and women business owners. We're calling on the mayor and the governor today to come up with a plan and a date. Restaurants cannot simply turn on a switch and start operating indoors. It takes weeks of planning. The cold weather is coming. Outdoor dining is going to be gone. Restaurants have to be well underway with indoor dining by then.
Now I'd like to introduce Trinez Woods Black of the iconic Sylvia's Restaurant in Harlem. Trinez, you are unmuted. Trinez, you're muted. You gotta.
Okay.
There you go.
Alrighty. Good morning. Just piggybacking off of what Robert said. You know, I am part of a business, a restaurant business that just celebrated its 58th anniversary. For more than 40 years, Sylvia's was the largest minority employer in the village of Harlem. And we took a lot of pride in knowing that we were able to provide jobs for our community that allowed our staff family, as we call them, to be able to not have to pay a bus fare or a train fare to get to work, to have flexible hours so that they can watch their children. We employ a lot of people who have multi-generational households, and things of that nature. We all know that the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry, works on very, very small margins that we have to plan for because there's quite a bit of fluctuation in the products and services that we offer. And there is simply no way that we, being the greatest city for dining in the world and not knowing when we're going to open. We're not asking to open tomorrow. We're simply asking for the simplest thing, a plan, some input, some direction, some light at the end of the tunnel, some answers to questions that so many of our employees have. There is no way that we can justify our neighboring communities that are serving indoor. And how do we justify that to our staff family that have been waiting patiently to come back to work? Outdoor dining has so many variables. By no means is that a replacement for indoor dining. But it would be very lovely if we were to be able to take advantage of these months of having partial dining inside and partial dining outside. Even having the ability, if the weather is incumbent like it is today, where are sales coming from? If it's raining outside in New York? And what happens when it rains outside in New York and people want to come inside? All we're simply asking, and this is so minimal that it's mind-boggling to me, is just when. What is the plan? We need to be prepared. We have to budget our way into reopening. And it's not fair for us when we support our community by giving jobs, when we support our community organizations by giving donations. We provide a safe haven for community to break bread. And we don't have the answers simply to give to our community as to when we're going to be open indoors, because we definitely need that income in order to save our industry.
Thank you, Therese. Next up, our friend George Constantino from Bogota Latin Bistro in Brooklyn. George, I am unmuting you. Or you can...
All right, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is George Constantino. I own 4 restaurants. 3 of them are in New York City. They're all in Park Slope, Brooklyn, along 5th Avenue, right near Barclays Center. My first restaurant, Bogota Latin Bistro, is 16 years old. We have 141 seats inside. My second restaurant, Miti Modern Mexican, is 6 years old. We have 70 seats inside. And my newest restaurant, unfortunately opened up right before COVID, is Medusa Greek Taverna, and we have 50 seats inside. Before the pandemic hit, we had 130 plus employees. After the pandemic hit, when we were forced to close our dining room and bars to focus on takeout and delivery only, we laid off a majority of our staff. It was devastating for me as an entrepreneur, which, you know, I love to provide entertainment, food, and jobs. It was really devastating for me to lay off 100 of my 130 employees. With the help of outdoor dining, we're up to about 60 to 70 employees, but still nowhere near the business we used to do back in 2019. While outdoor dining is a lifeline, it's definitely not a solution. I continue to struggle to pay bills, payroll, vendors, business insurance bills, health insurance bills for my employees. I still pay rent at pre-COVID rates, and I also pay down business loans. It's difficult, it's stressful, and it's scary. Of course, public health and safety is of the utmost importance for my staff and customers. But we can see that for 2 months later in the rest of New York State, indoor dining has been safe and successful in Long Island and upstate New York and the rest of the state. So we want that here in New York City. As summer winds down and the colder months are literally around the corner, and even today it's raining, you know, that really affects business. It's difficult when there is no plan to actually plan for the future of my business. I don't know what tomorrow brings. It's scary. You know, as an entrepreneur, you like to plan for the success of your business so your customers and employees can benefit, but with no plan, you can't do that. Therefore, we need immediate plans on the reopening of indoor dining to at least 50% capacity. We urge our government, Cuomo and de Blasio, to open indoor dining in New York City like it is in the rest of New York State. We need this. The New York City restaurant and bar owners out there, we need this. We need you to help us. This needs to happen as soon as possible. Otherwise, more and more businesses will close. It's really sad walking up and down, New York City, Manhattan, Astoria, even in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and seeing so many for rent signs. And I can't tell you how many emails I'm getting, to open up a new business. And I can't even think about that right now if I can't even save my 4 businesses. So we urge you to help us and allow indoor dining. Thank you.
Thank you, George. It's so true. The New York City Hospitality Alliance conducted a survey in the month of July about rent. About 500 restaurants and bars responded to it. Only 4 out of 5 of those businesses were unable to pay any or only paid partial rent in the month of July, and only 1 out of 10 of those businesses were able to renegotiate their lease. We are in a commercial rent crisis, and the only way we are going to be able to get this restaurant economy up and moving again is by having a plan to get indoor dining opening. And if it is delayed, as I said before, we need support. Government mandated restaurants to be closed. That same government now has a responsibility to help these restaurants survive while they're closed so they can reopen. So with that, I want to introduce our friend Massimo Felice from Vinum in Staten Island. Massimo, I am unmuting you.
Good morning. You guys hear me?
We can hear you.
There we go. Andrew, thank you for inviting me. I have 3 locations on Staten Island along with Vinum, and we only sit about 40 seats here. I have an American Bistro, sits about 80, and then I have a catering kind of restaurant that basically sits about over 200. And that one's pretty much dead in the water because there is no catering, there is no parties, there's no weddings, none of that, as we all know. Robert mentioned something earlier, a quote, unlawful discrimination. I'm happy that he mentioned that word and not me, but I got to go along with that. It's like all my counterparts that have spoken before me, we're all pretty much in the same boat. We're all experiencing the same things with employees and everything. And it's just very, very frustrating and upsetting that I have friends and people that I know in Long Island, which is not far from us, from where I'm at, that have been operating for the past 6 to 8 weeks with the partial inside and then the outdoors, which I wish we had that now because we can use that revenue of using some of the indoors and outdoors as well. Everything I hear around me is that we're not going to be opening for a while. So, I mean, we need to open ASAP, as in tomorrow. We'll make, it's not a flip of the switch. It is true. But you know what? At this point, opening right away and catching some of the season will give us the extra revenue that we'll be able to use the outdoors plus the limited indoors that we're going to have. Because even at 50% is going to be a tough battle to go forward on. I understand it's better than not having it, but we definitely need the outdoors as well. We need to catch the last few months of this weather for sure if we're going to weather the rest of the winter in front of us. The one thing that upset me a little bit, I have to mention it, yesterday, I don't know if you heard Andrew or everybody else, de Blasio came out with another one of his wonderful quotes saying that he doesn't think that New York City restaurants are going to open until there's a vaccine. That is the most alarming thing that I could ever hear. Because a vaccine, as we all know, if we're lucky, we're looking at something at the end of the year or the beginning of the new year. Landlords, look, I'm not a landlord. I have a lease, like many of us. My landlord, in one of my places, has been okay with me, giving me 25 to 30% off. Others, not so. Nassau helpful with me. But in the same token, I understand them because, the landlords here in Staten Island, and I'm sure other small boroughs, they have taxes they got to pay. They got mortgages they got to pay. They cannot afford to tell me, hey, don't pay for the next 3 months or 4 months, or I'll give you 50% off, because there is no federal help for them. So unless they get helped, they can't really help us as far as rent is concerned. Aside from that, pretty much, guys, I mean, that's, there's another thing I have to mention. I mean, you're right. We met our Cuomo's mandates long time ago. We're well below the mark that he has put up regarding, infections and all that. Everybody, the whole state is been open, and New York City is not, and there is absolutely no reason at all. And that's the frustration part, that Cuomo and the city and the state are not coming out explaining to us why we're not open. They're simply saying that we're not. They got to give us the reasons why. And the beauty about it, I think, is because there is no reason. If there was a reason, then the rest of the state will not be open as well. That's it, boys.
Thank you, Massimo. Next up, our friend, also from Brooklyn, from Manella Restaurant, Blair Papagni. Blair, I'm going to unmute you.
Am I unmuted? Did it work? It worked. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Blair Papagni. And Andrew, thank you for inviting me here today, and to the other panelists for coming. What I'm hearing is the same frustration that I'm feeling, and that I have been feeling for a while. As Andrew mentioned, I have a restaurant in Brooklyn. Had this been 2 months ago, I would have said I have 2 restaurants in Brooklyn. I unfortunately had to close one of my restaurants that I had been running since 2007. It was a tiny little diner called Jimmy's Diner. It was a half block from my house. I raised my 3 kids in there. I had the same staff in the kitchen for over a decade. And I made some of my best friends I ever met through that place. So back in March, when we had to close, and my staff looked at me and said, are we going to close? I said, absolutely not. There's no way we're closing. This is going to be just a bump in the road, and we'll reopen. And unfortunately for us, looking at having 11 months left on our lease, looking at a liquor license that we had to renew, and looking at what was a real lack of a clear path to any sort of indoor dining. For a 25-seat diner, there was no way for us to stay open. I shifted my focus completely to my other restaurant in Greenpoint, where we are lucky to have a small garden in the back where we can seat about 14 people. But we all know the realities of what we need to make to be able to pay our rent and our insurance and our purveyors and our staff. And I'm sure, like most of you, every week, the first thing we set aside is payroll. Everything else comes after that. And for me, the most difficult part of looking at anything past November is the idea of having to lay off my staff again. For me, and I think for all of us, that would really be devastating. When we had to close in March, not only did we have full walk-ins that we had to pack up and give to our staff to take home, donate to places, but we had to say goodbye to them with no idea what's going to happen. And my fear is that without a plan from our local government, come November, that's going to happen again, that it's going to get too cold to seat outside. There's been no guidance on heaters. We know in the past we've not been able to use propane. Can we use electric? What if it's a gas line? What's going to happen with National Grid? Is it okay to just have a plumber? We have no rules right now. And for us, I'm not a doctor. I'm not saying let me seat inside tomorrow. I'm saying, given that we have other examples of what's working, give us a plan. So that way our landlords can get paid, because a lot of our landlords really are decent people that deserve to get paid. I don't see my landlord as the enemy. I see him as someone that I've been working with for 11 years. And I want to continue to work with him. And unfortunately, right now, I can't afford to pay full rent. I really wish that I could, but that's not a reality of my financial situation. So what I want to ask for is just a plan and some guidance, and to look at how New York City has beyond risen to the challenge of COVID, and to maybe trust us that we will continue as restaurant owners, as employers, as responsible citizens of New York City to rise to the challenge. Because as we all know, winter is coming. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Blair. So now we're going to jump from Brooklyn up to the Bronx. Mr. Alfredo Anguera from Vitro. I want to thank you for joining us. I am going to unmute you. There you go.
Can you hear me? First and foremost, I want to thank the New York City Hospitality Alliance for putting this meeting together and for giving us a venue to discuss the issues at hand. Secondly, I think I speak for all of us when I say, despite our businesses, the number one priority for all of us is the health and safety of ourselves, our families, our patrons, this nation, and the health of all of us is number one. And when we were asked as an industry to shut down, we did so understandably. And we all told the line and we all understood what was at stake, and we put the best foot forward. I think what we're looking for now is a semblance of understanding of what happens next. We can see the road ahead of us. We understand what is happening. We were given kind of band-aids to help the industry, which I thank Governor Cuomo and I thank the mayor for being innovative in certain sense and allowing us to do takeout and to do alcohol to go with meals and allowing us to do patios. That was a great short-term fix, but it was exactly that, a short-term fix. It was a band-aid on the problem. And I think I speak for all of us when I say this is an unprecedented issue. So we can understand there are a lot of challenges and they're doing the best that they can, but that doesn't take away from the fact that now that we have the outdoor patios, now that we have the alcohol to go, we can see the fall approaching, we can see the winter approaching, and those are not sustainable models for the fall and for the winter. New York City hospitality is a billion-dollar industry. What happens to this industry? Now that we can see across New York State that they're allowing gyms to reopen at reduced capacity, that they're allowing other restaurants throughout the state to open at reduced capacity. Well, what is the plan for New York City restaurants? Maybe they do have a plan. Maybe I'm not privy to that. But I think as business owners, we can all agree that communication is key. And all we're asking for is communication, to understand, not just communication, but to be a stakeholder, to understand what is going to transpire. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you the probability of infection rates for a given restaurant in New York City. I can't do that. But if that is what's on the table, then let us know, because we have procurement to worry about. We have bills that have been mounting, whether it's from our landlord or, for those who don't understand this industry, from our liquor provider, where we get 30 days, or whether it's been from our food provider or the food we have mounting bills we need to deal with. As a business industry, if this is what's coming up ahead and you're telling me I'm not going to open in the fall, or I'm going to open up at 50% capacity, which Andrew already mentioned, isn't even a solution just based on the math of a restaurant. Let us know. That's all that we're asking. We're asking for information. We're asking for guidance. We're asking for a semblance of understanding of the problem. As Blair had discussed, we've been given the outdoor patios, and that's, again, a wonderful thing. And thank you to the city and the state. But we're not allowed to use propane heaters. And what happens as the temperature is dropping and it's getting to 60 degrees, 50 degrees? What happens to heaters? The FDNY is going to come down and shut us down for having the propane. So how do I keep the area heated, and how do I maintain this business? Should I just shut down? Should I close operations and pay my rent until next spring? We need guidance. The fabric of New York City, and I do not mean this as hyperbole, the fabric of New York City is at stake in terms of what this city is going to look like moving forward. And I think we have a unique opportunity to all get our hands involved in this and say, okay, we understand the problem. we've done our part for the problem. Now let us do our part for the solution as well. And I think as a broad organization and as a broad stakeholder of businesses, that's all that we're asking.
Thank you, Alfredo. So our final speaker from Queens, from restaurant Casa de Chef, Alfonso Sikai. Alfonso, I will unmute you. All right, you're on.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Thank you very much for bringing me here to express my concern. You already say my name is Alfonso Sikai. I'm the chef owner at Casa de Chef Bistro in Woodside, Queens, with 28 seats restaurant. It has been as a fine dining restaurant, lately the most popular in the hood. It's really hard to understand and to predict what the small little restaurants, like my restaurant, 28 seats, to survive all this time. And as an immigrant, we always wanted to keep business. We always wanted to have business and operate it and create jobs in this city. My situation is that being a small restaurant, it's impossible to maintain in this way. And at the same time, I would love to invest more for the future, business-wise, but have no idea what could happen in the next month, in the next 2 months. So if I wanted to invest today, where I already invest opening outside dining. We already spend money buying equipment, buying flowers, buying canopies. We already spend money, but we're not making enough money back. So it's really hard to have the and business to maintain and to predict, because like I said, it is super hard being a small little restaurant and not to predict, not to know what to do in the next 2 months or 3 months that the winter time is coming. So I think we need a little more help for this small little restaurants, which creates family job, and also creates for the neighborhood to maintain clean, to maintain safe, because business is the people who really cares neighborhoods. And in the situation that we're living now, it's really hard. It's really hard. And besides that, we're not making enough business. We cannot make money to pay rent. And every day, instead of being revenues that will cover bills, we're going negative, every day negative. So, you know, like somebody was saying, it's better to close down, to shut down. But in the same token, when I wanted to do that, we have a lease sign up. We have a personal guidelines lease sign up. And that it's keep us like tied up, like we cannot go anywhere. We need some kind of help in this situation. Solution. Obviously, it's something that we never thought that it could happen, but we are in this time, and we need to survive. We need to have some kind of plans and solutions for small little restaurants like mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. Well, that's with our speakers. So if you want to ask any questions, you can use the hand feature, but I want to sum it up, and I hope all of you have heard what I've heard today and what I've been hearing around the clock. Our small business owners, our restaurant owners, they are in a dire situation. They understand public health and safety must be paramount. We are all in this together, but we need fair and equitable policies. We cannot discriminate against one section or region of the state. Here in New York City, we are so critically important to our industry. You've heard these people's voices, and there are countless more voices out there. We want to work collaboratively with Governor Cuomo, with Mayor de Blasio to develop a plan and give guidance. This is a time during crisis when we need our leaders to lead, to give us hope, to give us information, and work with us to ensure our businesses come back, our jobs come back, while people stay safe and healthy. And I think it's fair to say that the reopening plan around the rest of the state thus far has worked in New York, through New York State, and it's time to try it in New York City, or at least give us a plan. I have been hearing from business owners day in, day out. They say, we want to work collaboratively, but then all of a sudden they see the gyms go to court and sue. And then within days, look, they get a plan to reopen with a date to reopen. We want to work collaboratively. Business owners need guidance. They need to know if they should even try to keep their business going. So I'm going to start there with Marla Diamond. Marla, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me, Andrew?
We can hear you. Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. So you kind of just answered my question. I was wondering if there was going to be any legal action on the part of your association as there was for gyms. And I'm wanted to get your reaction to the mayor saying yesterday that he doesn't see restaurants getting a full reopen until there is a vaccine for the virus.
Sure. Well, I'll make a quick comment and then I'll let our counsel, Robert Bookman, address the question as well. Listen, we want to work cooperatively. That is what our plea is. That is what our demand is, to work to come up with a plan. But clearly, and I've been hearing from business owners around the city that they want to go to court. We are reaching out, trying to work cooperatively on this. But it did send a message very clearly that when others sue, they get a plan and they get a date. So all options are always on the table. This is our plea to work cooperatively to get a plan ASAP for reopening indoors. And we will, see what happens our next steps. Robert, you're welcome to add to that.
Yeah, our organization is known, to be in the halls of the city council, at City Hall, in Albany. We're known to be cooperative team players. We have never brought a lawsuit in the history of our organization. Having said that, all options, including all legal options, are in fact on the table. And we are going to be closely monitoring what the response from the mayor and the governor is to this press conference to determine what our next steps may be.
Yes, and I would add, sorry, Marla, your other question was concerning the mayor's comments. It's deeply disappointing if he made those comments within the context of a thoughtful plan that was being laid out. People may not accept it, they may not like it, but at least there is a plan justifying it. One of the challenges here, which we said before, is there does not seem to be any scientific justification to continue to keep us closed when the rest of the state is open, operating under essentially very similar, if not almost identical metrics. And that is one of the things that are problematic. So we would hope all of our elected leaders in addressing this industry make their comments within the context of a plan. Lack of a plan means lack of guidance for business owners, and it means it's only going to exacerbate the economic crisis. So it was disappointing, and I think you heard from Massimo from Venum Restaurant, his disappointment when he heard it as well. People don't like to hear, in a news conference, something that basically could ruin their whole entire life. Let's see. Rocco Bertuccio, New York One, hello. You should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hey, great to see you guys. I'm so sorry to hear about all this. It's so sad and heartbreaking. Andrew, are you, even if you are allowed to reopen indoor dining soon, do you think there needs to be some kind of a bailout plan from City Hall for restaurants to save the entire industry until it gets back on its feet?
Absolutely. Like I said, and even if we were to open up tomorrow, we understand there are a lot of different challenging questions business owners need to ask themselves. And as an organization, we leave it up to those individual businesses to make the decisions they need to make for their business within the context of the laws and the requirements. But absolutely, number one, we need the federal government to pass the Restaurants Act. It's a bill in Congress and in the Senate. Senator Schumer has just signed on to endorse it. It's a grant program that would basically get cash injections to these restaurants to cover all of their expenses. It also is important to note that we are part of the economic ecosystem. Think about the upstate New York farmers that haven't been able to sell any products to New York city restaurants. Think about the vineyards upstate and in Long Island that we know Governor Cuomo has supported so much over the years. They're unable to sell products. So this will help get the economic activity throughout the industry moving, because so many other sectors rely on the restaurant industry's economic engine. We need to deal with the rent issue. There is a bill that's been introduced in both the state legislature and the city to deal with rents, giving landlords basically tax forgiveness if it's passed on to their commercial tenants. We need that. We need business interruption insurance to be paid. We also need Mayor de Blasio to allow restaurants to apply a clearly disclosed surcharge to their menu prices, like restaurants throughout the rest of the state and the country are permitted to do, which again, another example, restaurants are being discriminated against. Every other industry here in the city are permitted to add a clearly disclosed surcharge that will allow restaurants, if they so choose, to bring in additional revenue to help give money to back of house kitchen workers that are prohibited by law from participating in a restaurant's tip pool. It allows them to bring some money in to help cover the PPE, gloves and sanitizer and other things. So there is a long blueprint of policies we have, Rocco, that we need federal, state, and city government to act on. We've gotten some good things passed, and we're thankful for that, but we need a lot more. Sorry, go ahead.
Rocco, also in the recent hearing we had just last week at the City Council, Chairman Jonai excoriated the administration on how little they have budgeted for help to small businesses in the city's huge, multi-billion-dollar budget. And he correctly pointed out that it's an investment. This industry pays hundreds of millions of dollars a year in taxes that are being lost. And the more they invest in restaurants and give us aid so that we can open, they make that money back many times. So yes, a lot more needs to be done, but at a minimum, we need to be able to reopen.
And just real quickly, with the tourism industry, no sign of it coming back anytime soon. How much more pressure does that add on the industry, especially, I guess, restaurants mainly in Manhattan that rely on a lot of tourists, especially like in the theater district and other tourism hotspots? What can you talk about that in that respect?
Sure. Well, restaurants throughout the 5 boroughs have been devastated and they've all been impacted similarly, but there's of course differences. But yeah, the loss, 70 million tourists coming to New York City every year that come out to eat at our restaurants, drink at our bars, go out to our culture. Without them, it is going to be absolutely devastating. We know they will eventually come back. That's why we need to demand that all levels of government provide us the support. So when they are prepared to come back, there are actually restaurants and bars and other venues to come back to. The other part of that is we continue to hear a lot of these companies that have office space in Midtown Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, but really around the city have been telling their employees that they don't have to report back to work in the office until next year. I understand that. That's clearly their choice, but we need some civic responsibility, because one of the reasons people move their offices or open up companies here is because they love the vibrancy of the hospitality industry, the restaurant industry. And if we're not supporting these businesses, similar to when the tourists are ready to come back, when the workers are ready to come back, they're not going to have their local restaurant. They're not going to have their barber shop. They're not going to have their dry cleaner. All of these small businesses in these communities are so essential to our communities and to our city. And without tourists, without office workers for the unforeseen future, we are going to need support. And one of those ways we can support are by enacting those policies we mentioned and giving a plan for indoor dining, just like everyone else has, not only a plan, but they have indoor dining.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Jonathan Inoa, I believe. Sorry if I got the last name incorrect.
Hi. Hi,
Hello.
I'm a reporter for New York One Noticias. I'm wondering if the speakers that speak Spanish can answer a few questions for me related to the topic for our news station.
Absolutely. Sure. One of the speakers want to?
Any volunteer? Alfonso, or I don't know if George speaks Spanish, or Alfredo.
Yep. You know, why don't you ask your question and then I'll unmute them.
Okay, so I'll ask Alfonso first. Alfonso, ¿cómo te sientes tú con la situación de que ustedes no están haciendo lo suficiente dinero para poder mantener los negocios abiertos?
En realidad, la situación es crítica porque, un ejemplo, mi restaurante solamente tiene 14 pies de frente hacia la calle, ¿verdad? Y entonces, con el outdoor que tenemos, tengo el mismo espacio al frente, con lo que me da apenas 2 mesas para poner, 2 mesas de 4x4. Es imposible, es imposible. ¿Y cómo lo estoy haciendo ahorita? Es endeudándome, todos los días endeudándome, todos los días la renta, los biles, quedando atrás. Es algo que es incomparable la pérdida diaria. Y eso que a pesar que mi restaurante fue un restaurante de familia, pero de todas maneras, se imagina lo que uno tiene que todos los días luchar. Y lo peor del caso es que no se puede hacer o programarse para un futuro, porque de verdad no se sabe qué va a pasar en los próximos 2 o 3 meses más. Hasta ahora, ahora mismo estoy en que hay que proyectarme. Si me endeudo más, invierto más, pido más dinero para seguir sobreviviendo, o mejor cerramos. La situación es dura.
Lo siento mucho. George, ¿puede decir, George, si, qué tú quieres que suceda? ¿Qué te gustaría ver que sucediera para que tus negocios puedan salir adelante en medio de esta crisis?
Hola, yo quiero más ayuda del gobierno. Yo quiero que ellos permitir que gente puede, comer adentro del restaurante. También el Business Interruption Insurance, eso es algo que puede ayudar a todos nosotros mucho porque, es una interrupción que nos está ganando el ventos que gané el año pasado. También, que el gobierno que mira que es muy difícil para mantener un negocio, mantener un restaurante. Es un negocio que es muy difícil y durante COVID es más difícil. Hay mucha presión y todos nosotros estamos haciendo el más que puede. Like we're doing the best that we can. And necesito que el gobierno que mire eso y ayuda a nosotros. Esa es la cosa. Necesito mucha ayuda.
Y por último, for last, Alfredo, ¿tú piensas que es injusto que un negocio allá en Upstate New York están abriendo y permitiendo que la gente almuerce, coma adentro, pero aquí en Nueva York no lo permitan todavía?
Bueno, primero, yo puedo hablar en español un chin, pero no tiene suficiente palabra para decir todo lo que está pasando. Los negocios de nosotros están muriendo. Y con el negocio de nosotros muriendo, hay la gente que está trabajando ahí. Y más o menos lo mejor de la gente que están trabajando ahí, hay latino y hay African American. Y para el negocio eso se duele la cosa. ¿Tú me entiendes? Y entonces tú miras la otro negocio que están ahí en Westchester o ahí por ahí en Long Island y tiene gente que puede comer adentro. Y entonces nosotros estamos pensando, ¿por qué nosotros aquí en la ciudad no podemos hacer el mismo? La única cosa que nosotros estamos preguntando a la ciudad y a la mayor y la governor, hay información. Diga qué están pasando. Dígame, porque yo necesito diga a toda la gente que están trabajando para nosotros. Necesita dejarle a esta gente, tú tienes un trabajo para esta mes, o tú no tienes un trabajo. O yo no sé qué nosotros vamos a hacer. Necesita cerrar la puerta porque no hay ni dinero. No puede trabajar como así.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bueno.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Tonight, Eater. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this. So I have a question for you, all of you guys, actually, especially since you talked about sort of, the reopening, the indoor dining reopening in other parts of the state. Are there any concerns for you guys because of the unique density of New York City in terms of the return? Especially for a lot of restaurant staffers, especially minority workers, many of whom are coming from, parts of the city and will have a long commute. Is that something that's sort of a big concern for you guys in terms of the return to indoor dining?
Well, for your first point on density, I think we just need to be clear. What we're talking about is opening New York City restaurants. The same indoor requirements would apply to New York City restaurants as they do to upstate restaurants, which is having tables 6 feet apart and complying with all the various social distancing and other safety requirements. So 50% occupancy and tables 6 feet apart in the Bronx is the same thing as 50% occupancy and tables 6 feet apart in Schenectady, New York. So density refers to outdoors. We're referring to indoors. As far as
in fact, most restaurants in New York City have smaller indoor capacities than many of the large chain restaurants, for example, in the suburbs. So at 50% capacity, we're actually going to have fewer people inside our restaurants than many of the ones upstate who have been successfully operating for 2 months now. So we're not, the density is really a non-issue.
Yep. And then I'll let Alfredo, I'll say one thing and then I'll give it to Alfredo. On the worker issue, of course, these are essential workers. I think as several of the speakers said earlier, this is like our family, and public health and safety always needs to be of the utmost importance. But our point is, shouldn't, if the state designed this program to allow restaurants to open up if they meet these benchmarks, what is the difference upstate or in Long Island than in the city of New York? Workers, the enhanced unemployment now is basically gone. We'll see what happens, with it moving forward. But everyone has legitimate concerns. All these things need to be thought through. But as several people said, we are not the scientists. We are not the doctors here. We are just asking to be treated the same as the rest of the state. And if the state and the scientists and doctors have determined that these safety requirements are appropriate outside of New York City, they seem to have worked over the past couple of months while workers and people have been inside. That's that. Same thing with the travel. We're being told, you can take the trains. I've read some articles there, but I think what we're asking is for everything to be applied equitably. And the owners are in the restaurants too. So, and their families often come into the restaurant. So I don't really try to look at this as like a difference always between like the owner or the workers. We're all in this together, and we need to rely on the science and the data. And if the science and data is saying it's okay for people to travel and to be in restaurants at these capacities under these requirements elsewhere, then why not New York City? And if there is a well-articulated scientific reason for it, then that should be presented along with a plan for how and what needs to happen for us to reopen. Alfredo.
I believe your question was more geared towards the population density within New York City as in relation to someplace like Yonkers or White Plains or Syosset or someplace. That is twofold in regards to a restaurant. One, our workers, for part and parcel, either live very close to the restaurants, and that is by design, because in inclement weather, a lot of our workers can walk to work or can take a short cab ride or can take a short bus ride. And so for the most part, our workers live very close to the restaurants, and it provides us the ability to make sure our local community is employed. But that brings to a very interesting point that public transportation in New York City and New York State is still widely available. You can still take the MTA, you can still take a bus, and the density in that particular train, car, or that bus is far more dense than any restaurant. No restaurateur would allow their restaurant to be that tightly compact and dense. In addition to that, we look at what's being done with the New York City school system. And as a parent, I am glad that they are designing a model and a plan to reopen the schools, because I think education is key, especially for my kids, because they drive me crazy. But we look at a model that's being designed for the educational system, and we're allowing children.
Oh, Alfredo, you froze up.
To return to a classroom, either in part or in whole or totally remotely, but they're designing a model to have them return. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I still freeze?
Nope,
Good.
your video's frozen, but we can hear you.
All right, so they're allowing them to return to a super dense situation where restaurants, part and parcel, are not in that same situation. And lastly, is about just a diaspora. And what I mean by a diaspora is New York City is the most densely populated city in this country. We have over 8 million residents, and if you look at the greater tri-state area, we're talking about 12 million people. It would be foolish to assume that these people do not travel. It would be foolish to assume that, oh, I have a restaurant in Westchester and they're okay to open at 50% capacity, but they've never had a customer from Manhattan or from the Bronx or Brooklyn, or the same thing about Long Island. So if they can do it, and we're worried about the density here in New York City, that density by the very definition of a diaspora travels. So we just need.
And he froze again, but just to finish up,
and I'm okay with being told no. I'm all right with it, and I need to be told why.
You know, we're also having New York City residents, dense New York City residents, go eat at these restaurants, you know, throughout the state and the suburbs, and you know, as well. So, you know, there is no bubble here, and if it's safe for teachers and school children to be indoors for 6 hours a day, it's certainly safe for a resident of the Bronx to be in a restaurant for an hour in the Bronx, rather than going a couple hundred yards to Westchester and be in a restaurant for an hour.
Andrew, can I just jump in
Sure.
for 1 second?
Absolutely.
I just want to address the question of staff. I personally have worked in my restaurant since we were able to reopen every shift. I made the decision to only be open 4 days a week so that I could be there every shift to offset labor cost. I really deeply care about my staff. I give them little hand sanitizers to take home with them. I have masks that my local assemblyman, Joe Lental, gave to me that I could give out to my staff. I would never put my staff in a position that I felt was unsafe for them. I have 3 children and I work and I go home to them. So I would also not put myself in a position that I felt was unsafe. I think that all of us as restaurant owners care very deeply about our staff. So if we felt like this was not safe, we wouldn't be doing it. It's not worth it.
Good point. Good point.
Thank you all.
Great, thank you. And I didn't know, Marla, I saw your hand was up. I don't know if I just didn't put it down before or if you had another question.
No, I was just wondering if you could quantify, like put a percentage to the number of restaurants that you believe will not reopen.
So it's really difficult. I know that there's been various lists out there. 1,000+ restaurants have already shut. We don't know yet. One of the things that, or I should say there's a few things. One, as you know, the state rightfully has a suspension of the eviction courts, a moratorium on evictions. The city has also passed an incredibly important law that suspends the enforcement of personal liability guarantees. Restaurants, many of whom have already exhausted their PPP, their Paycheck Protection Program loan from the federal government, are close to doing it. So we have, in a sense, been artificially propping up restaurants right now. So I think the number over the next 6, 12, and 18 months will continue to grow. I suspect it will be in the thousands. One of the big wild cards, or 2 of them, are: 1, will the federal government be able to come through and pass the Restaurants Act, another round of PPP, and other support for these businesses? The other is, what is going to happen with indoor dining? If businesses know, and that's why we need a plan, that we are not going to be able to reopen until there's a vaccine, and say that's January, many of them will probably just say, I'm throwing in my keys. But if they find out you can start opening at 50% reduced occupancy in September, they may try to hold on and fight and be able to make it through. So unfortunately, it's impossible to give an accurate representation of how many places will close, but it has to be, we imagine, in the thousands. From some of the lists I've seen pulled together, it's already 1,000 plus. I've been hearing people and speaking with attorneys that are working and trying to work on leases that the number is going to continue to skyrocket. So sorry, I don't have an exact number, but
Mauro, just yesterday anecdotally spoke with a real estate broker who's prominent as a hospitality specialist. And he said the last few weeks he's been getting over 30 new rental cases a week. That's usually a couple of months worth. And he's getting over 30 a week, meaning newly vacant places.
George. Oh, hold on. Just wait a second.
Okay, I'm there. Can you hear me? Yeah. I was going to say for us, for restaurateurs in New York City, I mean, the golden era of every year is really April, May, June, July. So we're at the end of that. So you are going to see a lot more closures coming up because, you know, I'm sure a lot of restaurant owners wanted to just make it to that period to see what would happen. And as fall comes, especially with no inside dining, they're really, I can see that there are going to be a lot more closures.
And that's the reason, going back to why we need a plan. Business people need to use the best information available to them, just like government does or should when they're making decisions about how they are going to operate their business. Their employees are asking, as I mentioned before, we do know that there's still about 200,000 people that were working in eating and drinking places before the pandemic that are still out of work. That's, I think, about 60% of those workers or so. So you can imagine, you know, the devastation if we can't save many of these businesses. Great. Well, with that, Massimo, give you the last word.
Yeah, no, just want to go on what George just mentioned regarding our season that we just lost, April, May, June, and July. Our next season is coming up is October, November, and December. Unfortunately, even when they do hopefully let us open at 50%, October, November, December is basically where we make our money to survive the horrible months, which at least from my part is January, February, and March. Going on what you were saying, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot more restaurants closing up because at 50%, we're not going to make the money that we need to make and put aside to survive those months. And even aside from just letting us open, that will obviously be a great start, is to come up with some kind of plan. We're going to need definitely some kind of a stimulus plan or something to help us survive those months for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way,
Yeah,
I'm going to throw one thing in.
I would agree. You know, even if the governor says tomorrow that Labor Day we can open at 50% capacity, which we would like to see, and that would be wonderful. It's hard to imagine that we're going to have either in reality or by law the type of private functions and private parties that you have throughout November and December, which is a huge cash infusion for our industry. And without that, and it's hard to imagine we're going to have that this year, it's hard to imagine a lot of restaurants being around to next March or April, you know, when there might be a vaccine available. So if we don't get this indoor dining, and I mean like now, we're not going to have a number of restaurants that are going to be able to make it till next spring, when hopefully there's a widely available vaccine. This is an urgent crisis right now.
So I want to, George, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, something also I wanted to bring up, you know, I take a lot of day trips, Long Island. My family lives in Long Island, and I don't know if anyone's noticed this or bringing this up, but the mask culture, like the responsibility to wear a mask, I think is so strong in New York City. I think New Yorkers get it. When I go to Long Island, I am surprised how many people are not wearing masks. And these are the same people that are going out to eat indoors. You know, so that's something to think about. Like, New Yorkers take this serious and they are responsible in wearing their masks. So that's something I can throw at, you know, Cuomo and de Blasio to really push this forward.
Yeah. Listen, I want to thank you all for joining us. As you said, our industry is just so important to the fabric of New York City. These are our small business owners that everyone always claims that we need to support because they are part of our neighborhood. They are so important to the tax revenue that fund our essential services, that attract people to come to New York City and stay in New York City, and we need to support them. To Governor Cuomo, to Mayor de Blasio, you are leaders. We need you to lead. We demand a plan. Safety, public health must be paramount, but our economic health must also be paramount as well. Please, it's urgent. Give these people the information and support they need. We're asking to work collaboratively to figure this out together because we are all in it together and we need to get out of it together. So please engage us. We want to work with you and we want to get this done in a smart, data-driven way. It makes no sense right now to anyone why New York City is not opened up indoors. If you think it makes sense, explain it to us and articulate a plan. So I want to thank you again all for joining us. The New York City Hospitality Alliance is here to work and support with the industry. And like I said, day in, day out, we hear the voices of these small business owners and we need to support them. We need to do it. So thank you, everyone, and we'll certainly be in touch.